Hello, everyone, and welcome to Innovation Coffee. I am Robert Wolf.
And I'm Gabriel Peterson.
And welcome to Innovation Coffee. All right, everyone. Hello, welcome to Innovation Coffee. Once again, I'm Robert Wolf.
And I'm Gabriel Peterson.
This show, live stream, as you know, brought to you by Arm, where the coffee is hot and the innovation is hotter. This is a live stream that takes a deeper look at the Arm developer ecosystem and explores many things going on in and around this exciting space. Each of these live streams will start with developer updates, followed by in-depth conversations about Arm and our growing developer ecosystem. We are joined by featured Arm experts and partners from within Arm and our developer community. We will discuss a plethora of topics tailored for developers, showcase opportunities, explore resources, and bring new and exciting Arm developments to light. Each of these events will finish with an audience Q&A. Of course, if you have any questions, please be sure to post those in the YouTube chat and we will address them as soon as possible. Now, as a reminder, I want to tell you all that if you're enjoying this live stream, make sure you smash that like button. And of course, we do go live with streams like this every single Thursday at 5 p.m. UTC. So if you want to get more stuff like this out of the Arm ecosystem, make sure that you subscribe to the Arm Software Developer YouTube channel. Now, a really cool thing that is happening today is we are actually meeting with two very, I think, influential and important people from within the Arm ecosystem. Now, we are going to be meeting with Reinhard Keil, who is a senior director of embedded technology at Arm, as well as Marc Goodner, who is a principal program manager at Microsoft. And let's not fail to mention that Marc Goodner is actually one of our esteemed Arm developer ambassadors. Yes, and actually seems to be very active inside of our Discord server among various other places. So I think that we have some exciting stuff planned for you. Gabe, anything else that you'd like to add before we bring on our guests?
You may want to mention that another one of our team members is also going to be joining us. He's hosted Innovation Coffee in the past, and he's sitting there
in the green room. Yeah,
yes.
he's going to beat me up when I see him up in Vancouver for Open Source Summit. All right, so let's bring everyone in now. You already are going to know Michael Hall. So Michael Hall, what's up, buddy? How are you?
Hey, everyone. How's it going?
Great. Thank you. And let's also bring in our two guests. So we have Marc Goodner from Microsoft and Reinhard Keil here from Arm joining us. Hello, you two. How are you?
Great.
Yeah, great. Hi.
Excellent.
Nice to meet you all.
Yes, good to see you. And so this is actually a really cool episode. And, I think that I won't do it as much justice introducing you two and the credentials and the cool things that you guys do in and around Arm. I think I'd rather let you two, as we usually do on this show, give your origin stories. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And if you don't mind, we'll start with you, Reinhard. Could you just kind of give us an overview? Who are you? What do you do at Arm? A little bit about your past, maybe a personal anecdote.
Yeah, so as some of you know, I have started a startup company a long time ago, focusing on development tools. We were famous for the 8051 compiler at that time, which was actually an ass-kicking compiler with best performance and best code size. And nowadays, we have then sold the company to Arm. That was almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
And I had then headed the Keil MDK team, initiated CMSIS, and was working on Arm virtual hardware. And nowadays, I'm part of a team that defines the next generation tool chains that we will bring to life soon.
Excellent. And Reinhard, are you able to share maybe a personal anecdote about yourself? Do you enjoy skiing, playing some music?
Yeah, privately, I'm a fan of nature, so I do cycle a lot. So for example, years ago, I made a cycle ride from Munich, where I live, to Venice over the Alps, which is quite nice ride. I would recommend this to everyone that loves nature. You come across about incredible places there. And when you cycle, you have actually time to watch the nature.
That's very cool. Yeah, I think one of my favorite classes when I was in university was an elective. It was an ecology class, and we got to go learn the names of all the native plants within our area, finding the difference between a native and an invasive species, the different types of rocks and animals. So nature has always been somewhat of a side passion of mine, and I think it was stemmed through this class, ecology. But yes, awesome. Very cool to hear, Reinhard. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, what about yourself? Would you mind telling us, kind of following those footsteps there?
Those are some big footsteps in this industry. But yeah, I'm a product manager at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft quite a while now. But today I'm working on the C++ team at Microsoft. I've been on that team for about 7 years. The C++ team at Microsoft, we've been kind of expanding our reach. I think people traditionally think of Microsoft and C++ as, the Microsoft compiler for Windows and Visual Studio, but we've been on this journey to address cross-platform developers for a long time now, where we have cross-platform capabilities in Visual Studio to target Linux and Mac, but we also have, Visual Studio Code, which runs on other platforms. And so our team is responsible for our C++ support across Visual Studio and VS Code. And, one of the last kind of places we don't really reach is microcontrollers. And so I've been on this journey to try and help get our C++ ecosystem and our tooling to work well for embedded developer needs. And that's, how I've come to work with Reinhard and Arm, to try and improve our IntelliSense for that space, to improve our debugging capabilities. And so we've been working on that for several years now across Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code.
Very cool. And what about you? Did you have a personal anecdote to share? Something you enjoy?
I think, I just got back from a 4-city European vacation. And so I'm really happy to be able to travel again. I really missed traveling during the pandemic. And it's kind of one of those things where prior to the pandemic, most of my travel was business travel. But after the pandemic, my children are now fully grown. And so my wife and I can travel without them for the first time, which has been great. So, I'm really looking forward to, continuing to get out and travel and see more of the world.
So the pandemic was kind of like your portal to freedom.
It was, and it was kind of sad, to be honest. The year before the pandemic, I had done a lot of travel, and I actually remember telling my boss at the time, I really don't want to do much travel in the next year. I didn't realize it was going to be 2 or 3 years of no travel at all when I said that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, very cool. Very nice to meet both of you, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. Michael, I remember we were talking yesterday, and you were unsure as to Mark's role at Microsoft. Did he clarify that question, or did you want to ask that question?
Yeah. So the question really was, like, I'm familiar with Visual Basic, not Visual Basic. Throwing back there. I'm familiar with Visual Studio, and then Visual Studio Code. Mm-hmm. But I also know that they're like completely, or at least my understanding is they're completely independent products, right?
They are.
So my question was, like, when we were talking earlier, Rob and I was, does he work on just Visual Studio, or can we ask him Visual Studio Code questions as well?
You can, and in fact, I work across both. And so it's interesting. The part of Microsoft I'm in, the C++ team, is part of developer division. And I always kind of like to set context for people about that. In developer division, there's a team that's focused on Visual Studio Code that kind of owns the core of that product. There's a team that owns kind of the core of Visual Studio. But other than that, we're kind of organized by languages. So like I said, I'm on the C++ team. There's a .NET team. There's a Python team, et cetera. And so each of those teams can kind of focus on those products as it makes sense for their developer community. But for the C++ ecosystem, we care very much about Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. So we care about both. And our team supports the C++ support in Visual Studio Code as well as Visual Studio.
And are those separate things, or can you support both of those IDEs with the same underlying?
There are common elements and there are unique elements. So we actually, one thing that's kind of, how can I say, we have an IntelliSense engine that we share across both products. We have a debugging engine that we also share across both products. And but there's always, kind of unique things from a UI perspective, or from, how each tool works. So there's often parts of it that's unique to either tool, as well as there's parts that, we try and share where it makes sense. And the embedded support in particular is interesting because, we leverage an open source component called the MI engine, which is our bridge to speaking to GDB. And that MI engine is how we also have cross-platform and embedded debugging support in Visual Studio. So we get the same debugging support across both products by leveraging that. And because our team is small, we also took an approach of developing our unique embedded views in a way that we could share them across Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. So when our team implements something for embedded, we enable it in both products.
Okay.
All right. So awesome. Thank you so much. Now, I want to really start this off with a bit of an icebreaker round. There's going to be an opportunity. We have lots and lots of questions lined up here for both of you here. But I think that it's important for our audience to kind of get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. And I think it's fun to do this round. So we're going to queue up the icebreaker round, which is the what were you thinking? Okay, so during this round, what we end up doing is we show a picture that we found on the internet, and I try my best to get a good clip of you all. Reinhard, I found a video of you, and I tried snapshotting, the best possible face I could get during this video. But I actually am curious, what were you thinking here? And where was this? This seemed like a presentation that you were giving, and how long ago was this? What were you doing?
Yeah, that was perhaps at the ST booth, I believe, and we were giving here an interview about our newest and coolest technology. So I don't remember exactly what this topic was about, but it might be that we have released a tool set for the MP1, where there is a Cortex-M4 included, and it was really cool to see how the Cortex-M could be programmed with our toolchain. And the Cortex-A device in this device runs Linux, so it shows the combination of an hybrid system. And I think this 5 years ago or something like that, right?
5 years ago. Okay, yeah. And so this was then 15 years before you sold, after you sold the company to Arm.
Yeah, something like that. So
okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. Let's move on to the next one here. And this one actually Gabe picked out. So Mark, he's telling me it was hard to find a picture of you online. So instead of finding a picture, he pulled something from your social media, and it looks like you were at some sort of craft cocktail lounge, or what do they call those?
This was an absinthe bar.
Oh, an absinthe bar. Were you able to walk out like lucid?
Yes, I was. I'm a fan of absinthe, and there was an absinthe bar in Prague. I happened to be there after Embedded World, and so I had to check out the absinthe bar. And I was smart enough to go in the afternoon because my warning came that it was time to leave when they brought out I think 6 or 7 shots of drinks for a crowd that had just come in, and it was like, all right, time for me to leave.
That's funny. I saw that picture on your timeline, and I almost posted that one because I figured there might have been a good story that went with it.
Yeah.
It was an interesting place. I'm familiar with a lot of the history of the beverage, and the staff there was interesting because they could facilitate that sort of conversation, and they had a really deep bench of absinthe, and I got a fantastic one that they suggested. But everybody else who came in was clearly not there for the subtleties of that beverage.
Yeah,
just hoping to see the Green Fairy.
I heard
yeah,
acquired taste.
Yeah, it's very much an acquired taste for sure.
I think I'm still very ignorant to what absinthe even is. I just look at it like people from, what is it? The myth that absinthe makes you hallucinate and do all this stuff.
Myth. Yeah.
I mean, is it sweet? Is it bitter? Is it tart?
It's interesting. So a lot of people add sugar to it to make it sweeter. It has a kind of a black licorice taste to it. But what's interesting about it is that by simply adding water to, this liquor, it really just completely changes the taste of it. And it tastes like a cocktail, which is why it was so popular in the late 19th century, was because all you needed to do was add water to this and you had a cocktail. And that's really where the problem with it came, was from alcohol abuse more than anything else. And that's what led to all the bans. It was just simply alcoholism.
Just drinking way too much.
Yes.
Way too much, way too easily.
It was cheaper than water for a period in France.
I mean, weren't all alcohols cheaper than water at some point?
I think that was true. In England, I think it was gin.
Generally safer to drink too.
Yeah. Yeah, generally safer, yeah.
Yeah, people just aren't claiming they're not alcoholics. They're just frugal.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so here we go. Today's topic is transforming the embedded development. I want to say transforming embedded development, period. How are we transforming embedded development here? So we have a series of questions, and I think to kick this off, Reinhard, you are the perfect one to kick this off. We want to ask, because this is kind of where we're going to cycle into the IDE's aspect of this, but we're going to start off talking about Keil. For those who are on the call watching right now or watching on demand later, what is Keil? What are the tools? If you could please just give us a high-level overview of Keil.
Yeah, so as I said already, we were starting with compilers for the 8051. These were basically the productivity enhancements at the time where you could get a lot more productivity by using a high-level language. Then we have actually integrated this in an IDE to make it easier to use, to make it more accessible, to even further provide more productivity gains. And today, these tools are actually have debuggers. They can do energy measurement. They have trace capabilities. We have complemented this with software building blocks. We started with CMSIS and CMSIS DSP libraries and with middleware. So it's really a rich set, a collection of tools and software components that help you to build an embedded system. And our market is pretty much everywhere in the industry. So our customers are the who is who in automotive, medical, industrial, to name a few. Of course, also white goods and infotainment. So we had pretty much over the years, I would say 50,000 big companies used by NASA, for example. So a lot of prominent names. So Boeing did use our tooling for verification, simulators, just to name a few.
Very nice. And I think diving into kind of like this last point that you just made, these big companies that are using it, I want to kind of talk about the developer for a second. So let's focus on what types of developers will get the most use out of these tools, and what will they be doing?
So we structured our tools to make it easy to use, which means we start already with beginners, university programs, and things like that. So our tools start with teaching, but we have also the capabilities that professional users are expecting. So we have, for example, a FUSO certified compiler, we have FUSO certified software components, RTOS, we have event analysis capabilities, we have code coverage capabilities, and we have hooks to plug in static code analysis tools and things like that. So it's really a rich set of customers that we can address with these tools, starting from education up to the most demanding professional usage.
So for someone, like you mentioned, it's good for students and things like that. For those wanting to learn these tools, how should they go about it? Should they just go to the website and start with the documentation, or is there an actual curriculum or something?
Yeah, with documentation, it's really the wrong way. I think you need to get your hands dirty, and we offer a community edition. So you can actually start on the desktop with a community edition. And if you want it even easier, then you can use the Keil Studio Cloud, which is an IDE version. It runs in the cloud, has no installation hurdles. And it is actually able to connect to boards on your desk, but we offer also connectivity to Arm virtual hardware, so you can run without physical hardware and do the first exercises. The other way to get used to our products is there are universities that offer actually training classes. One that comes to my mind is in Texas. There's a university that has training classes leveraging our tools, and they actually give you step-to-step introductions. There are tons of videos on the internet, which you can also use to start learning. Some of them are using our tools, some of them are using other tools from the ecosystem. So I would recommend really to get your hands dirty and start using the tools and learn it this way. Of course, you need to have some basic knowledge about C and C++. So I would recommend, therefore, that you get familiar with C and also with some embedded concepts. There are good books about it, but reading the ARM documentation might be not the best starting point. With maybe one exception, there is a Getting Started book for MDK, which really bridges the gap of not knowing much to, let's say, you can actually start to blink an LED on a board or even use middleware and RTOS kernels. So if you want to learn, I recommend this book, but it's more or less a book that gives you step-by-step intros how to use the tools.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So real quick, I just want to address the fact that some questions are popping up in the chat here. So hybrid robotics, we're actually going to make a transition in a minute from, the whole microvision IDE over to the VS Code stuff right now. And so Mark is going to get a chance to talk about this and maybe address your question in just a second. But one that did pop up right now related to the whole Keil stuff from hybrid robotics, he's saying, will Keil ever come out with a more maker-friendly license tier? So something that's more free. And I think there is something out there, right? A free tier of this?
There is a community edition, which is good for non-commercial usage. So you can actually use it when you have non-commercial products. We have also editions that are in partnership with silicon vendors. So for example, with ST, we have an edition that supports the Cortex M0 parts from ST, which is completely free to use. So you can, for example, pick the latest Cortex M0, which is a high-end microcontroller from, let's say, given the standards replaces basically the traditional 8-bit with a price point that is below the traditional 8-bit. So that is a good starting point.
Cool. I know Robert just touched on IDEs, and that's legit what I was just about to ask when this came up. And it's a question that you, Reinhard, could probably start, but Mark, you'd probably be the perfect person to answer the second half of it. And it's just regarding telling me about microvision, because I know the document, or at least the website, if you go to Keil, it still lists microvision as the IDE. Yeah. But I know we were talking to you before, and you were mentioning there's a switch away from using microvision towards other IDEs, such as Visual Studio or VS Code. So could you tell me more about why the switch?
Or maybe why microvision was chosen to begin with, and then why the switch. Yeah.
Okay. So we choose to make microvision because we needed to lower the barrier of using the tools. That was the primary intent at the time. And we combined with it also a powerful debugger. We basically hidden all the complexity of setting up the tools by putting a graphical user interface behind. This graphical user interface was also extensible. So there are a lot of extensions for microvision, but it is today old technology. So it is over 20 years old from the IDE perspective. We started with it in the late 90s, and it's time to replace it now. And what we are going to do is the next generation of our tools will be based on VS Code from the IDE perspective, and will be a lot more modular, because we will perhaps talk about it, but the transition to the new use cases, you need continuous integration, DevOps, MLOps. And this means you have to break apart the tools that were before just in an IDE to make them more flexible in the usage, so that you can use it in CI system, in the cloud, for example, in GitHub and things like that. And we love VS Code because it has all this flexibility and provides us a lot of extension points.
Yeah, so maybe Mark, do you want to elaborate a little bit further on that, the whole transition to Visual Studio VS Code?
Yeah, so I think, like, from Microsoft's perspective, what we're trying to do is provide like a foundation that others can build on. Like, so for example, like, I mentioned earlier, our team's responsible for like C++ IntelliSense and debugging support in those products. And then what happens is others can build, their unique solutions on top of that, right? So it's really up to the preference of the end developer as to whether they prefer Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. It's also up kind of to the ecosystem in terms of where are they going to bring additional value into those products? Are they going to focus on VS Code, or are they going to focus on Visual Studio? I think what I'm seeing is right now the embedded industry is very much kind of moving towards Visual Studio Code for the reasons that Reinhard mentioned. There's a lot of momentum there, and also because it is so modular that you can get just the pieces you need, and it's cross-platform. It runs on all of the major operating systems. It even runs on ARM64. So you can if you're primarily an embedded developer and you're using ST parts, then you can get your tooling from ST for their extensions that enable what they have. If you're using ARM's compilers, then you can use the Keil Studio extensions. But if you're doing a little bit of data science, somebody gives you a little bit of a side project, that you need to do a little bit with Python, you don't need to move to a different IDE. You just install a Python extension for Visual Studio Code, and all those skills that you're already familiar with in terms of your daily life of just using that IDE and being familiar with it, having all your preferences set up, you're still in that same environment, right? And I think that's what's really great about Visual Studio Code is this just broad ecosystem of stuff, that's out there for it.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Mike,
Right.
did you want? There you go. Sorry.
We have a question in the YouTube chat from David Aldrich. He says that the Cortex-M ecosystem seems confusing. Talks about some of the different IDEs and stuff that you can use. And really the question is, will the new VS Code tool set focus on CMake? So Mark, that's a question for you.
Yeah, and actually I think I can take the part of it and then hand off the rest to Reinhard, because coming back to that common theme that I have for us when we look at cross-platform development, including microcontrollers at Microsoft, we focus on CMake. So everything we do for cross-platform, CMake is the build system that we choose to build all of our experiences around, and that includes embedded. So when you find example projects or demonstrations that I'm running, typically they're using CMake as the build system. And that's kind of a lingua franca, if you will, of build systems out there. And I'm seeing more and more usage of CMake. It's in across the C++ ecosystem. It's definitely the dominant build system today across all of C++. It seems to be gaining in embedded. There's a lot of stuff out there around embedded for CMake these days. But I think that, embedded is always special, and there's always needs for prescribing some things that maybe, something like CMake, which is generic, you don't have that extra bit of information that you need in order to target microcontrollers. And so I think that's where things like CMSIS come in, right? And so the new CMSIS project that ARM is running, is working on a new C project format that kind of describes the embedded project. CMake is still there under the covers being used to orchestrate part of the build, but there's another layer that just kind of brings in some additional information on top of that. And Reinhard, you can probably speak more to that.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for this good intro. So indeed, we are developing together with ST and NXP our CMSIS toolbox. This is how we call it. And the CMSIS toolbox starts with a project management system that leverages the CMSIS, the existing CMSIS packs. We have today over 9,000 devices supported with CMSIS packs, which means there is all the startup code, there's flash algorithm, there are register information for register view as part of these packs, and you can actually combine this also with middleware packs. I mentioned that. And you actually choose the device or the board you want to work with, and this configures the tool chain. So in the back, we are using a CMake. And then you can start using software components that are in these packs. So for example, the FreeRTOS kernel, for example, AWS, cloud connectivity, or TensorFlow Lite middleware and things like that. And therefore, we are harmonizing the way how the ecosystem is working. So as I said, we have today about 40 companies that are using already the CMSIS system to deliver device support. We have now activities together with NXP to educate the software industry to deliver this, to use this format as well. And our intention is to make it easier to use. The reason why we are using this packaging system on top of CMake is quite simple. Embedded programs have often a long life cycle. So you have to manage, once you have released your embedded system, you have to manage frequently this embedded system for 5-6 years in a maintenance mode, or even enhance functionality further. And this means you need to have capabilities in the tooling that allow you to replace software components when there is a new update available, and make this process really easy. And this is what the CMSIS system is about also.
Awesome. So I want to answer one question in the YouTube chat real quick, and then I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. So the question here, maybe we can make this slightly quick, comes from Maximilian on YouTube. Is Keil Studio Cloud size limited?
No.
There you go.
Short and sweet.
Short and sweet.
So you can of course, there is a workspace limit, because the workspace is in the cloud and you cannot upload multi-gigabyte, but it is no code size limit.
Awesome. So I want to kind of like two-parter this. And actually, Michael, maybe you can ask your question, because we talk about the different tools that are inside or that are part of the whole Keil Studio or Keil tool set. We have the Keil MDK, the Keil Studio Cloud, et cetera, et cetera. Michael, you had a question about, I think, like the version, the latest thing coming out, kind of segueing back to when we were talking about the transition from Microvision over to VS Code.
Yeah, so actually I was reading Reinhard's blog post from just a little while ago about the new MDK version 6. So I was curious, what are some of the highlights of what's new in version 6?
As I have mentioned already, we are focusing on the new development flows, which means we are focusing on continuous integration, on test automation, and on machine learning. Machine learning has a workflow called MLOps, where actually the algorithm is created by providing data and labeled data, and this creates then the algorithm for you. So for example, an algorithm for face recognition, but you can use machine learning for so many other things in the industry. So for problems that you could not solve before with traditional embedded programming, this is, from my perspective, a cool thing, because first it removes the hurdle to develop the algorithm yourself, to optimize it yourself, and you can do a lot more complicated stuff. Awesome. But this requires a different way of thinking and a different way of tooling. We are developing in the moment an interface that allows you to capture, for example, sensor or audio data in your target system. So you will still need to have some embedded capabilities to connect to the peripherals of your system. Once you have collected this data, then you go to a system that supports MLOps. This is typically cloud-based. We have multiple partners for that. But I pick one now, Quixo. And in the Quixo system, you have a way to label your data, and then the MLOps workflow cranks out multiple algorithms that are a possible choice to solve your problem, and then you can pick and choose the one that is the best for your requirements. And this is a cloud-based system. It uses then Arm virtual hardware to validate that the algorithm is correct, and delivers to you a CMSIS pack with the algorithm that you integrate in your embedded application. This is roughly, in a nutshell, how this works, and then you are often can develop and verify in your embedded system again. So it's a bit different workflow than the traditional embedded programmer is used to.
So I know we've had people in our Discord talk about Keil quite a bit, and one of the common questions that keeps coming up are, does it support this board or does it support that board? So could you tell us, like, what are some of the most popular boards or MCUs that Keil Studio supports?
Yeah, when you support 9,500 MCUs, it's hard to pick the most popular one, as you can imagine. But I would say what we frequently see is the Cortex-M4 is really a cool processor. Many devices are based on that. What we nowadays are seeing is a shift to M7s and also a shift to M33. And what we also see knocking on the door from Renaissance, for example, there's an M85 coming out, which has the latest helium technology included. I think that this will be the parts of the future. The parts that are popular today are the M4s, M7s, and not to forget about the M0s that are really replacing the 8-bit microcontrollers. And recently, Texas Instruments and also ST released parts. And the ST parts, the C0 family, seems to be really popular.
Great. Okay. So let's go into kind of, I want to say here, let me get back to my notes. Wow, I lost them. Okay, so I want to bring Mark back in here and talk a little bit more about the kind of GitHub workflow, right? So GitHub Actions has kind of taken, I think, a stage and a big part of the stage lately, right? And so could you walk us a little bit more through this whole process? We kind of touched on it, but let's talk about a little bit more about how this whole workflow is leveraging all of the work that GitHub has done and how this whole VS Studio, VS Code, and the Keil workflow factors into all of this.
Right. So GitHub, I mean, fundamentally, I mean, they're hosted Git repos with a bunch of additional services available up in the cloud. So, you know, both Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code have a, you know, great Git support and also have integration with GitHub to make it easy, you know, to clone your repos down, to push changes up, to review pull requests and all of those sort of bread and butter sort of features. I think for embedded, what's interesting is that GitHub is also making investments there. And actually, that might be a good topic in the future would be to invite some of the GitHub folks over to talk about that, about what's going on there. Because GitHub has been, there's services up in the cloud for GitHub around build and continuous integration, which is always interesting. Like, what does that mean for microcontrollers? But there's also security features. Like GitHub has code scanning capabilities for CodeQL that enables you to do scanning of your source code. And they've actually added embedded specific profiles, like for AutoSAR and things like that. So when you check in when you push your changes up to GitHub, you can actually scan them and get security alerts and warnings that you can review, you know, for embedded specific profiles. So that's one thing that's really great, so that you can actually make that as part of your workflow. The other part is GitHub Actions, which people are probably familiar with in terms of, you know, managing your builds up in the cloud and, you know, creating releases and that sort of thing. For embedded, you know, that's always interesting because GitHub Actions has kind of a monolithic VM, if you will, where they put the kitchen sink into this VM. Like anything anybody could possibly need for C++, Node, you know, Python, it's just all in that VM, and everybody gets kind of the same image. They have a notion of where you can host that yourself, and so you can tailor that image yourself for your specific needs. And so that's traditionally, you know, how you would have to do something for embedded development. You would have to, you know, use your own hosted action runner and get your specific compiler for your project in there. IR actually supports that, in that they have documentation on how to set up a GitHub action runner with the IR compiler in there. But what's interesting is where GitHub's going now is they're working on GitHub Actions that will be hosted that are tailored for embedded as well. And they're partnering with Arm on that, actually, to get the Keil compilers up in a hosted GitHub action runner that also includes the Arm virtual hardware. So now you get to that point of like, well, how do I CI for embedded? What does that mean? How can I actually run tests in the cloud? Well, with Arm virtual hardware is kind of the answer for that. And I think, you know, again, this is like why I'm here, because now I get to pass it back to Reinhard to talk more about the specifics of what's going on there.
And this was something that was addressed this year, right? Like the whole integration.
It's very new.
Very new. ARM virtual hardware, integrated in with GitHub. And yes, actually, Reinhard, take it away. Sorry for interrupting, but I got really excited.
Yeah. You said already most of the stuff. So what we actually have partnered with GitHub is a software as a service platform where you have a complete setup of the ARM compiler and ARM virtual hardware. It complements basically our desktop tooling. So you can use today's MDK to develop test cases. Frequently, we address industry that is safety relevant. They need to do testing with unit tests, integration tests, and you can actually do this type of tests leveraging this GitHub service. We are using it ourselves for what we call FUSA RTS. This is a functional safety certified runtime system, including RTOS kernel, to validate this against all the different standards. And we are going to make this even easier to use with the next MDK version, where the integration, we are leveraging your VS Code. The Git integration is better. And you can have easier access to the test results. And in this way, to configure also the ARM virtual hardware, we will make this easier. ARM virtual hardware has also virtual interfaces, so you can actually, for machine learning, you can do data streaming, test your algorithm, and validate that the algorithm is still working after modifications, for example. We have also an interface to the public internet, so you can even test cloud services.
That's great. All right, cool. So Michael, I noticed you still have some questions on the sheet. Did you want to knock any of those out?
Really, I think just one that hasn't been answered yet. And again, this is one that I'm pulling from conversations I've seen on our community Discord. Is with the new Macs have ARM processors. We've got Windows 11 for ARM coming out. So, what operating systems and architectures does the Keil tools support?
So the old version was Windows, but in the new world, we will support Linux, Mac, and Windows, of course. So we will extend our offering. As stated, Keil Studio Cloud is a cloud-based offering, so we will also have cloud versions. But there is basically no limit, so you can run on Intel or on ARM hardware.
And I guess we could kick that question to Mark as well. Like, what operating systems and platforms does Visual Studio and VS Code support?
Well, Visual Studio is Windows only. So if you're using Visual Studio, you have to be on Windows. Now, with Visual Studio, it can target deploying and debugging things on Linux or Mac, but the program itself is only Windows. And yes, Windows 11 on ARM as well is supported. We had a big push around that, including getting our compilers and everything running there. So we're kind of all in on Windows on ARM for sure. For Visual Studio Code, it's supported across Windows, Mac, and Linux. So yeah, everywhere.
Wait, so you're a Windows guy?
Yeah. Well, I'm mainly a Windows and Linux guy myself. I'm not big on the Mac OS, but I like the devices for whatever reason.
No, of course. So I want to talk about something that's kind of like a little bit of a side topic here, and I would like kind of to hear from both of you on this. So if we were talking to a developer that's entertaining or trying to maximize their path to product, how might we pitch this workflow to someone who's trying to accelerate their project and really hit a strong path to product? And maybe we could start with, does that question make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so maybe we start with you, Mark. You seem to have done really well at segueing into Reinhard here. So maybe we start with you, Mark.
Well, I think, one of the things, there's another aspect here we haven't really talked about in terms of I think everything we're talking about developer productivity should help sell using Visual Studio Code with the Keil extensions, for targeting embedded devices. I mean, I think that there's a productivity story that just makes sense. But in terms of getting to product, you're a part of a team, right? And so you need to also get your team, working and up to speed. And I think there's another aspect of this we haven't touched on as much, which is there's manifest files that we use as part of the projects here. And there's a tool as part of this called VC Package that reads this manifest and can actually restore your tooling environment. And so, for example, the manifest would specify, I need this version of ARM-GCC, I need this version of CMake, I need this version of the Ninja build tool. And when another developer on your team clones that project to their machine, if they haven't bootstrapped their machine yet, if they haven't read your onboarding document that takes 2 or 3 hours to read and maybe 2 or 3 days to set up, this tool will read that manifest file, identify those tools, reach out to the internet based on the metadata, go grab those and install them on your machine and configure them for you. And what's even greater is that the power, as Reinhard was talking about how long these projects can last, because that manifest actually includes the version information as well. When you have to switch to another project or you come back to an older project, it can restore the tools for that project, right? And it'll put them on the path so that you're working with the correct versions of the tools and the correct tools for that project. So you don't have that moment all the time on your team where you're like, oh no, I installed the wrong version and that bug isn't right because I've got the wrong version of GCC installed, etc. Or
the whole it works on my machine.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. We're trying to solve that part of the problem. And the thing is that when you're in Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code, this is all transparent to you. This will just happen because we integrate these tools into the IDE, into the extensions that we have there. But the tool is available at the command line as well. And so we're working, that there will be a CI story as well, so that, in that GitHub Actions story that we were talking about earlier, that manifest is used there as well to restore the correct version of the tools for your project. And again, that also ties in with the CPAC tools, from the CMSIS project, because those help you restore the correct CMSIS packages, right? So it goes out and gets the right the right CMSIS packages for you, which is, again, why is there something more specific for embedded in this space? That's part of why. When we started investigating this space, we designed this VC package capability around restoring artifacts for your build environment around the embedded market, because it had such an acute pain point around bootstrapping a dev box. My favorite customer discussion on that was somebody who told me it's not a problem, it just takes a couple of days. But when we looked at like the rest of the embedded ecosystem, one thing that we were scratching our heads about and couldn't figure out was this problem where people pass code around that's common in effectively sneakernet. They get code that's not part of their project, that is, a board support package or driver software, and it's passed among, over and over again and just copied around. And I think that's one of the places where the CMSIS packs really start to shine and show how they can help this ecosystem, because now the project format, for CMSIS actually defines what CMSIS packs you're using, and then you can go get them from where they come from, right? So that you don't have this, this disconnect from the original source. And I don't know if there's anything you want to build on there, Reinhard.
Yeah, you really said already the pain point is for users to set up the development environment. And this development environment is frequently a little special. Yeah, you need a certain Python version, you need certain tool versions, you need a simulator for that. And the VC package tool from Microsoft really takes care of that. And actually, since it is multi-platform, you can set up also a CI environment with exactly the same tool chain. And in this way, you can actually mix and match the development flows as they fit best for your requirements. And the other aspect, we brought this in already today, when you create an embedded program, then you cannot write everything from scratch. You will need to use functional building blocks. This is what CMSIS provides. We provide this packaging system to pack functional building blocks. And for example, you can get sensor middleware from NXP in future and add them to your application, combine this with a machine learning algorithm, And again, it's important that you know this is a certain version, because embedded programs, once you release them to the markets, you go in on maintenance mode. And yes, there will be problems. We talked about security issues. There might be a security issue in a crypto algorithm, but you don't want to, you want to actually solve only this problem. And therefore you will only add or replace the crypto algorithm, while the remaining components of your software remains the same. And this is what's important for an embedded developer, to look at the whole product lifecycle, not just at the beginning.
Yeah, and just to add, to call back to something earlier you were talking about around MLOps as well, I think that that's also an important part of this, because those models that people use evolve over time and need to be updated over time. And so, as we talk about all of these capabilities, it also connects with all of that stuff we were talking about earlier about GitHub and CI systems, because now when you make these changes, you have that confidence, because you can run the compliance scans, you can regenerate the build reliably. And over-the-air update is still a problem to solve, but you have everything to give you the confidence that you can actually get that update out there. And so it's great to see the embedded industry evolving and becoming much more aligned with modern development practices around CI, because ML, obviously there's the security issues which are always going to happen, but the ML is also coming for embedded, and ML is going to drive the need to update things in the field more often, or even just update the next wave of devices, if not the ones in the field.
Real quick. So we have about 5 minutes left. We have one more question in the chat here that Gabe's going to address right now. Yeah. And then we're going to head on into the shameless plugs, and we're going to close this out. All right, guys? Is that okay? Excellent. All right. To you, Gabe.
Yeah, cool. So John Beckett in the chat asks, will the VS Code extensions and their underlying CLI tools support the more obscure features of the, and I've never had to say this out loud before, CMSIS
packs?
Yes, the CMSIS packs as generator packs referenced via relative paths like in Keil.
Yes, they will, is the answer. We are working with the partners to make this happen.
Excellent. All right, cool. So yes, they will. That's the answer. All right. I think closing this out, we asked you all in the green room before this episode if you had any shameless plugs to address. So I'm gonna give you each a chance to kind of let our viewers here watching live and or watching on demand later. And of course, I did not mention this throughout the episode yet, but every link, every mention during this episode will be included in the description below. So if you are watching this on demand later and you hear us talking about a particular link, or you see it pop up in a banner, check the description and you'll see what link, where you can click that link. So let's start with you, Reinhard. What would be your shameless plug for the day?
Yeah, I would suggest that you take a look to two things. One, to Keil Studio Cloud, which is available on keil.arm.com. And then you can also get a preview of a GitHub Action workflow. That's actually with the beta release of the Arm virtual hardware in GitHub. This is an RTOS validation suite, and you can take a look to the action that is running there, see how we are testing a complete RTOS kernel, and go into the details of that.
Excellent. Reinhard, thank you so much for those plugs. And now on to you, Mark. What would you like to plug here?
I'd like to just point people to our embedded tools extension. It's an extension for VS Code. So, that's the link to where you can find it in the marketplace. Actually, that's Reinhard's link for the Arm
Sorry about that.
But that's great. You should check those out too. Yeah. So
did I hit the right one there? This is
no.
That one
that's
is.
the one. Yeah, that's the one.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Yeah. So, and you can also find this just by searching embedded tools in the extension pane in VS Code. But that's kind of the entry point to find the common tools that we provide from Microsoft that are really kind of focused on a core CMake based experience. But that brings in the VC package stuff I talked about, as well as embedded specific views like a peripheral view for analyzing your peripheral devices, or and peripheral registers, as well as RTOS threat aware view. And that should get you to our serial monitor as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And for those of you who are not able to type that out so fast,
yeah,
just also posting these in the chat as well, so you can click them through the chat or through the YouTube chat. And again, they will be in the description. So that's pretty much a wrap here, everyone. So we have about 2 minutes left, meaning I'm about to close this out. Were there any last words from either of you, Michael, Mark, or Reinhard, and or all of you? Anyone?
Well, I have our normal spiel.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, so don't forget to check out the ARM developer program for anyone in the chat or watching this who has not already done so. It's just great in every way. Definitely go do it. We have a Discord. Michael, Robert, and myself are all in there, as well as just a ton of passionate community members.
Awesome. All right. Well,
I want to talk about next week because Robert, you hinted at the start of this broadcast that you and I are meeting up in Vancouver next week at Open Source Summit, and we're going to do some special editions of Innovation Coffee next week. Is that right?
There will be some special editions. Yes. So we might end up going live. I think we'll be there on Thursday. So maybe we'll take the actual slot on the Thursday this time. It will be a live from the Open Source Summit in Vancouver. Michael and I will have our mobile studio with us and hopefully pop-up banner. And we will be hopefully bringing on guests and partners from that area. We'll rally some folks and some developers to come interview with us. We'll talk about the cool things that are happening at that event. And then talk about some of the interesting things that we've gotten to experience while we were there. So, yeah, it'll be fun. And it'll be my first time actually meeting Michael. We've met in person, but like just kind of in passing. But this will be our first time actually meeting in person. Yeah. So it'll be cool.
And anyone watching who's going to be at Open Source Summit, let us know. Let me know on Discord or LinkedIn or wherever you can find me so that we can meet up.
Awesome. All right. So, gentlemen, Reinhard, Mark, of course, my two co-hosts here, Michael and Gabe. I want to really thank you so much. Really, you were great. Thank you so much for answering our questions, for spending this time with us, putting together your material, and it was just I had a great time. So thank you so much for joining us.
Great, thanks for having us.
For inviting.
Excellent. I'm going to close this out now to the audience here and to anyone watching on demand. So thank you everyone who came and joined us for this hour. I say this every week, but you could have spent it doing so many other things, but you spent it here with us, and we're very grateful for that. So thank you very much. And as Michael mentioned, we will be here again next week, 5 p.m. UTC every single Thursday. Once again, it helps us out a lot. If you enjoyed this broadcast, make sure you hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the ARM Software Developers YouTube channel, the place that you're watching this right now. If you have any questions beyond this broadcast, you weren't able to make it here live, you can post it in the comments. We'll do our best to get to them as soon as possible, but you can also join us on the Discord channel as well, or our Discord server, which you can find in the description of this video. Once again, thank you very much. And this was Innovation Coffee, and we were talking about transforming your embedded development with Reinhard Keil and Marc Goodner from ARM and from Microsoft. So thank you so much. You all have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, take care.